Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and welcome to the final video in our player progression series. We currently have a mini-map system as well as a player progression menu, but neither of them are toggleable in-game and have to be opened by clicking through menus. Obviously, this is not what we want. So in this video, we're going to set up a mini menu that will allow us to toggle between all of the different menus we have in the future. We'll have a shortcut where you can use the escape key to do the same thing. We'll make our menu remember what the last opened menu was so we can return there next time. And finally, we'll add the ability to pause the game during some menus and not during others. That's where we're headed in this video. Let's get started. Often what can happen when we're building our games is that we'll add a new system and give it all of its own logic for opening and closing and detecting button presses and that sort of thing. This can lead to all sorts of conflicts and also just messy code as we're duplicating our logic. Additionally, we want to make it a little fancier, adding a fade instead of just hard opening and closing the menu. So let's go ahead and head into our scripts folder, and here I'm actually just going to create a new folder to help keep us organized. We'll call this one UI. We're just going to be making two scripts today, and the first is going to be our menu manager. Now before we do anything in here, let's pop back over to our minimap toggle and take out the parts that we want to reuse. For example, we are going to need to take in input somewhere. So in our menu manager then, we can get rid of our start and update method and pass in the reference to our action system. We can also grab this on enable and on disable where we subscribe to the cancel button. We don't want to do that in each individual system, we're just going to do it once in the menu manager. For our menu manager to read all that, we need to grab our namespace for the input system. And finally, when we do press cancel, we no longer are going to want to just turn off the minimap. For now, I'll just copy this out so I remember that we need to replace that logic down the road. At this point now, we just have an incredibly bare bones minimap toggle. All right, our menu manager is now ready to take in inputs, but at the moment there's nothing for it to do. So let's just pop back into Unity, where we'll make the second script for today. This will be a new mono behavior script. We're just going to call this one menu panel. Now our menu panel is going to be a sort of parent to all of our different menu items, like the minimap and player progression, who are like children that derive certain DNA or methods from the parent. The reason we do this is that it will allow our menu manager to talk to all of them because they'll share the same family traits, in our case, things like an open and close method. So, what will every menu in our game need to have? Well, first, it's going to need to have a reference to its canvas group, as that will allow us to fade it. And then it's also just going to have a virtual method for when we want to open it, and another virtual method for when we close. The next thing that we'll want to do is head into our actual menus, so things like the minimap toggle, and make sure that they derive from our menu panel class. This makes them children. However, they also need to enact their DNA, so we need to make sure that they actually have an open, close, override method. Now, I don't actually want to do anything during these, so I'm just going to leave them there as empty methods. That said, if we go into our progression manager, we're going to do the same thing. We'll have it inherit from menu panel. And then down below here, I'll do it after the refresh UI method. We're just going to paste in those override methods. Now in this case, we actually do have a tiny bit of logic we want to happen here. We don't need to do any fade logic or anything like that, as that'll happen in the menu manager. However, when we open this menu, we want to make sure to always refresh the stats in the menu. Additionally, whenever we close it, we're going to want to cancel any changes we may have made to the attributes that hadn't been confirmed yet. Now the good news is that's literally all we have to do in our menu panels. The rest of our work today will take place here in the menu manager. So first of all, let's come inside and make a private reference to a menu panel. We're going to call this one our current menu so that we can just track which menus open at any given time. Next, we'll add another menu panel reference, though we're going to serialize this one. That way we can see it inside the inspector. And we'll call this one our default panel. Now then, down below, we can get rid of this commented out part where we used to just turn on the minimap. And instead, we're going to create a coroutine here called a switch routine. Our code won't like that at first, so we'll have to come down here and actually make that coroutine a private IEnumerator called switch routine. And it won't like that either, so we have to come up top here. We can just add the namespace that we are using system.collections. Now, anytime we call this switch routine method, it's going to need to know which menu panel we are actually switching to. So we'll take in a reference here to a panel. Then we need to make sure that when we actually call start coroutine, we pass a panel along. For now, we'll just use the default panel. Now, first off, we'll want to fade out whatever the current menu is, but we need to guard for the first time we come in here when we won't have a current panel yet. So we'll only do this if current menu is not null. Then we'll just do a yield return, and we're going to wait for a fade routine to run. Here we'll pass along whatever the current menu's canvas group is, and we just want to fade it from whatever its current alpha is to 0. Let's go ahead and create that coroutine now, another IEnumerator called fade, and this one will take in those 3 values, the canvas group to fade, a float for the value it's going to start at, and then a float for the value at which we want to end the fade. That way we can use it for both fade ins and outs. We'll start by making a float for our start time, which will just begin at 0, and then we'll make a while loop. So while our time is less than whatever our fade duration is, we want to kind of run this fade loop. That said, we don't have a fade duration yet, so let's pop up to the top and create that. So now, throughout this loop, we want to make sure to always increment our time, and here we're going to use unscaled time as some of our menus might be pausing the game. Then, we'll take our canvas group's alpha, and we're going to use a math function called lerp. Here, we'll just interpolate from our from value, going all the way to whatever our goal value is, and then it wants to know how far between those 2 marks should it be, and at this point we want it to always use the time divided by our fade duration. We'll then just eat up that frame by using yield return null so that it can run the loop again 1 frame later. At the very end, we just want to make sure that we got all the way to our fade and aren't off due to a rounding or fractional error, so we'll just make our canvas group's alpha equal to the 2 value. Now that we've written our fade routine, we can come back up to the switch routine. And once the fade is done, we'll take our current menu's canvas group and just set its interactableness to false so that we aren't accidentally clicking an invisible canvas. We'll also make its canvas group's ability to block raycast false so that it isn't getting in the way of our attempts to click a different menu. We'll call that close method we just made for every menu panel so that it runs any logic it's supposed to on closing. Alright, then at this point I'll just make a note up top that this is all our logic for closing the old menu, and now we're going to head into the opening of the new menu. So first off, we just want to update our current menu variable by letting it know that the new panel is the one that is now current. We'll then call the open method for that script. And here we're just going to copy paste all of our canvas group stuff, except that here we want to make it true so that it's interactable and now it is blocking raycasts. We'll then want to actually fade this canvas in, so we'll just do a yield so that we can wait until the fade routine runs, and this time it's going to take the current menu's canvas group, and it's going to go from its current value all the way to 1, which is full opacity. Now that's just a little wordy, so I'm just going to write this in a slightly shorter version. This part's optional. Instead, I'm just going to get a local canvas group called the new group, which is going to be equal to our current menu's canvas group. And all that does is allow us to replace all these current menu.canvas groups with new group, which just makes this a little more readable and easy to debug in the future, but is not necessary if you don't feel like doing it. We're about ready to run a simple test now, so let's click on the menu manager. Make sure to add this menu manager script. And it's going to want to know what the default panel is. In my case, I'm going to make it so that the player progression menu is the default, so I'll drag that in there. And I'll also just give it a fade duration of about 1/4 second. At this point then, if we go to our player progression, you'll notice it now has a canvas group spot here that's coming from our menu panel parent. We can drag its canvas group in there, and then head to our minimap, which doesn't actually have a canvas group yet, so we're going to have to create one. We'll add it on here. Just make sure that it starts off with a 0 and everything turned off, and then drag it in. I'll also just click on the menu manager and make sure that we assign a menu toggle action. I'm going to be using the cancel button for this, and the UI cancel does come by default, so unless you've gone into your input actions and changed the names, you should have a UI cancel here. At this point, I'll just remove my bootstrap scene, give it a shot, and you'll notice that it's sort of working. When I first pressed cancel, it does in fact open the menu. However, a second press both closes and then reopens, and we have sort of a weird flickering. Don't worry, you're exactly where you should be for now. So the main problem right now is just that every time we hit cancel, we call this switch routine, which closes the old menu and then immediately opens the new one. But what about when we just want to close the menu? So up here in our on cancel, we just want to add an if statement. First of all, we'll check to see if the current menu is not null, meaning we actually have a current menu already. If that's the case, well, we always want escape to close the open menu, so we'll do close all. Then we'll add an else statement here and paste our coroutine in there. So if when we hit cancel, there is no current menu, meaning the menus are closed, then we want to run our open routine. Now close all is just going to be a really simple method here. It's just got one line of code, so we can use the lambda expression as a shortcut. And we just want to call start routine on our switch routine and pass along a null menu panel, meaning we're just closing anything, not opening. That way, when it gets down here into the switch routine, it will still close our old panel. It'll set the current menu to null, and then we'll just guard this next part with an if statement. If our current menu is not null, then we'll open it. However, if it's the case that we're closing, it will be null and it'll just skip over all this logic here. If you don't do anything else in Unity, you can just go ahead and give this a try, and now our cancel will open the default menu, another cancel will close it, and things are working nicely. Alright, now let's just make it so we can actually toggle between some different menus. And to do that, we'll need to start by creating a little UI interface. So first of all, let's just drag our Bootstrap menu up here, as that's where all of our UI is. We'll right-click on the menu manager and add a button. Now we don't need the Text Mesh Pro, so you can go ahead and just delete it, as I'm going to use icons here. Now if we double-click the button, you can center it on your screen. I'll turn on my gizmos here so that I can see where the screen actually is. And then I'm going to be using the menu icons here. It's from Edahoshi's set. You can find the link in the description. Now if I go to the actual menu icons here, they're not currently sliced the way I'd like, so I'm just going to go into my sprite editor. Now in here, I'll click on the slice button, make sure we do it by cell size, and these are on a 34 by 34 grid. That will get them all on the correct size. Now then I can click on my button, I'll give it a new name, let's call this one the minimap icon, and I'll type in menu, and I want to get to the one that looks kind of like a map. In my rect transform then, I'm just going to set this to actually be a square. We'll go with 160 by 160. I'll drag that down into the bottom corner, which is where I'll have this menu sort of hovering. And actually that seems a little big, so let's go with 100 by 100. At this point then I can just duplicate that. We'll make this second one for our player progression icon. I'm just going to use the source image that looks kind of like a player. That seems logical, and then we'll drag this one into place beside the other. You can add as many icons as you want if you add new menus to the game. Now from there, we want to give these buttons something to actually do. So let's head into our menu manager. I'm going to come down below our onCancel call and create a new public method. We'll call this one toggle menu, and it's going to just take in a menu panel, which is the panel that we want to open next. Now first of all, say the minimap's open and we click the minimap icon, we probably want that to actually close it. So here we'll check to see if the current menu is the same one as the panel we're clicking on. If that's the case, then we'll call the coroutine switch routine and pass along null, meaning we want to close them. We can then return, as we don't need to execute any further here. That said, in any other case, whether the menus are all closed or whether I'm just clicking on an icon that's different from the panel currently open, we'll want to call the coroutine switch routine and just pass along the new panel so it can close the current and open that one. Now we can set up our buttons, so let's start with the minimap icon. I'll just close some of these menus here, and then in the button component, we're just going to add an onClick method. We'll drag in the menu manager, and then we just want to make sure that whenever we click it, we tell the menu manager to toggle a menu, and then pass the minimap toggle inside of there. We'll then do the same thing for player progression. Drag in the menu manager, and whenever we click it, we want it to tell the menu manager to toggle, and we'll just drag the player progression menu in there. Alright, we can then remove the bootstrap, and let's give this a try. Alright, now when we get in the game, things are mostly working. You'll notice that my map is having some troubles, but player progression works great when I hit cancel, or if I hit the player progression again, it closes. It's just this minimap that's giving us some troubles. The main reason for this is if you look at our minimap, you'll notice that the panel's currently turned off. That's just a little error in the code. If we open our minimap toggle, you can see that in Awake, we always turn off the minimap, and we don't want to do that anymore. We can remove all of that, and it's now a completely dead script, except that because it inherits from menu panel, it does pass along the canvas group information to our manager, so we still need it. And it's there if we ever do want to add more logic around opening and closing our minimap. Alright, with that done, we can hop into the game. And now if I click on player progression, it opens that menu. I can click it again to close. I can click on the minimap now, and it is in fact opening and closing properly. And escape also works. We can toggle back and forth. And on the whole, this is working really nice. Except that I'd also like to have some memory here, so that if I'm currently working in my attributes a lot, the next time I open the menu, I want to go back to that menu rather than getting distracted by a menu I don't want. Now to make this work, we'll go back to our menu manager and create another menu panel reference, this time to our last opened menu. This means we're going to have slightly more complex logic now whenever we hit the cancel button, as it's going to need to know which menu to open. So let's just make a menu panel reference here to the menu to open. And now we'll just ask a question. First of all, do we know the last opened menu? If so, then we want to open the last opened menu. If not, we'll just go with our default. Now then, whenever we open a new menu, we just want to let our script know that the last opened menu is that current menu we just opened. Now we just need to make sure that we're actually logging the last opened menu. So if we come down into our switch routine, right here after we open any menu, we'll set that new menu as the last opened menu. That's actually all we need to do. No setup necessary. Now when we get back in Unity, we can open menus, go to the minimap, and now if I close that and hit escape again, it goes back to the minimap, even though our default is the player progression. Now when we go to player progression, if I hit escape and open it again, we're all good. I can also spam click, and while it has a little bit of fading happening, it's actually working really nicely. Okay, the only thing left is that it would be nice if we could make certain menus pause the game, and perhaps you want the minimap to be able to be open while the game's playing, but you want to pause when you're playing with your stats. Let's set it up so you have that option. And finally, we have this little cancel button here that cancels our attribute points, but it feels like it should close the menu, so let's make sure that it actually does that. So to make this work, we'll just extend our menu panel by adding a public bool called pauses game. Then in our menu manager, we'll just create one more private method. This one will be a void method called apply time state, and it's just going to take in the menu panel we're currently looking at. So here, first of all, we'll just do a check to make sure that a panel was just passed in, so we're actually opening something, and then we'll ask if that panel pauses game. Now if it does, we just want to set our current timescale to be equal to 0. However, in any other case, whether we're closing the menu or opening one that's not supposed to pause the game, we'll want to set our timescale to 1. Now we just want to make sure that no matter what, anytime we call the switch routine, at the end we want to apply the time state for our current menu. And while we're at it, I'm just going to come up to our close all method here and make sure that it's public, that way our close button can have access to it. Back in Unity then, let's drag our bootstrap up here, and first of all, let's click on the minimap, and here for pauses game, I do not want mine to, so I'll leave that box unchecked. That said, I want my player progression to pause, so I'm going to check that box. Lastly, let's open up our player progression menu here, and in our attributes menu, we have that cancel button. Let's just scroll down here, and rather than have it talk to the progression manager and cancel changes, we're going to have it talk to our menu manager and just call the close all menu, which will both cancel changes and close the menu. We can then remove the bootstrap scene, and that will do it. Now when we get in here, we can toggle menus via icons. We can use the cancel button as a hotkey to open or close quickly. We can pause the game during certain menus, and everything's working nicely. All right, this actually brings us very close to the end of our Metroidvania series. I've got one little series left where we're going to show how to hook up an audio manager and set up sound and music, and then we'll wrap the whole thing up with a save system after that. Let me know what you've thought of the series so far, and also if you have ideas about the next series, feel free to put that in the comments and give me some ideas. Otherwise, I hope to see you when we start that new series. Until then, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.